While I was setting the Thanksgiving table, my house was already sold. That was the thought that would not leave me. Even as I adjusted the silverware just right, even as I smoothed the linen tablecloth I had used every year for the past 3 decades. I had turned 70 that morning. 70. I remember thinking how proud my late husband would have been, how he always said I made Thanksgiving feel like home no matter what. The turkey was in the oven, filling the house with that warm, familiar scent. Cinnamon, butter, roasted herbs. The kind of smell that used to bring my son running down the stairs when he was a boy, asking how much longer until dinner. I checked the clock. 5:12 p.m. They were late. Daniel had texted earlier, said traffic was bad, said they'd be there soon. Emily had added a smiley face. I stared at that message longer than I should have. Something about it felt rehearsed. But I told myself not to overthink. This was Thanksgiving. My birthday. My family was coming. I placed the last wine glass on the table, aligning it perfectly with the plate. 8 settings. I always said 8, even though it had been just 3 of us for years now. Habit, I suppose. Or maybe hope. The house felt too quiet. It hadn't always been like this. There was a time when laughter filled every corner, when voices overlapped and music played too loud in the kitchen. Now, the silence had weight. The kind that presses against your chest if you sit with it too long. I wiped my hands on a towel and glanced at my phone again. No new messages. Just that one call from earlier that day. Unknown number. A man's voice. Calm. Professional. Ma'am, I just wanted to confirm. When will you be vacating the property? I had laughed, politely at first, thinking it was a mistake. I'm sorry, you must have the wrong number. There had been a pause on the other end. Not confusion. Not apology. Just a pause. This is 214 Willow Creek Drive, correct? My address. My home. I remember how my grip tightened on the counter, how the room seemed to tilt just slightly. Yes, I said slowly. But I'm not moving. Another pause. Longer this time. I see, he replied. Then there may be an issue with the closing. Documents. Closing documents. The words didn't make sense then. Not fully. I told him he must have been mistaken, ended the call, and stood there in my kitchen, staring at nothing for what felt like minutes. Then the timer on the oven went off, sharp and loud, snapping me back. I told myself it was a scam. People try things like that all the time. I turned off the oven, basted the turkey, and pushed the thought away. Because what kind of person would believe something like that on Thanksgiving morning? What kind of mother would suspect her own son? The sound of tires on gravel pulled me from the memory. Headlights swept across the front windows. They were here. I straightened my blouse, smoothed my hair, and forced a smile onto my face before walking to the door. When I opened it, Daniel stepped in first, carrying a bottle of wine like a peace offering. Emily followed close behind, her heels clicking softly against the hardwood floor. She looked around the house, just for a second, her eyes scanning the walls, the furniture, the space. Not with warmth, not with nostalgia, with something else, something I couldn't quite name yet. Happy birthday, Mom, Daniel said, leaning in to hug me. His embrace was brief. Careful, like he didn't want to linger too long. Emily kissed my cheek, her perfume sharp and unfamiliar. Everything smells amazing, she said, smiling that perfect, practiced smile. I nodded, stepping aside to let them in. Dinner's almost ready, I said. My voice sounded steady, even to me. And as I closed the door behind them, I realized something with a clarity that settled deep in my bones. Whatever had happened, had already happened, and they were waiting for me to catch up. We moved into the dining room like nothing had changed, like every other year before this one. But the air felt different, heavier somehow, as if the walls were holding their breath along with me. Daniel pulled out a chair and sat down without looking at me, already reaching for his phone before placing it face down beside his plate. A small gesture that should have felt respectful, but somehow felt rehearsed instead. Emily adjusted her napkin carefully on her lap, her movements precise, controlled, as if she had practiced them in front of a mirror. I brought the turkey to the table, setting it down in the center, the steam rising between us like a quiet barrier. It looks perfect, Mom, Daniel said, but his voice was distant, like he was commenting on something that did not belong to him. I smiled and picked up the carving knife, my hands steady, even though I could feel something shifting beneath the surface of everything I thought I knew. How was the drive? I asked, keeping my tone light. Normal. Long. Emily answered quickly, before Daniel could speak. Traffic was worse than expected. She reached for the wine bottle and poured herself a glass first, then Daniel, then me, filling mine just a little higher than usual. I noticed that. I noticed everything now. The way Daniel avoided my eyes. The way Emily glanced at him before answering simple questions. The way their conversations seemed to move around me instead of including me. We began to eat, the sound of silverware against plates filling the silence that none of us seemed willing to break. I took a bite of turkey, but I could not taste it. All I could hear was that voice from earlier, calm and certain, asking me when I would be leaving my own home. Mom, Daniel said suddenly, clearing his throat as if the word itself had weight. I looked up, meeting his eyes for the first time since they arrived. There was something there. Not guilt. Not exactly. Something closer to discomfort. Have you checked your mail recently? He asked. The question was casual on the surface, but it landed with a precision that made my chest tighten. I set my fork down slowly. I check my mail every day, I replied. Why? Emily leaned back slightly, her expression softening into something that might have passed for concern to anyone who did not know her. We just thought maybe something important could have gotten lost, she said. You know how things are these days. I held her gaze for a moment longer than necessary, watching as her smile held steady, unbroken. Nothing important gets lost in this house, I said quietly. Daniel nodded too quickly, as if he had expected a different answer. Right? Of course. I just meant, he trailed off, reaching for his glass and taking a long sip of wine. The silence returned, thicker now, pressing in on all sides. I looked down at my plate, at the food I had spent hours preparing, at the table I had set with care, and for the first time, I felt like a guest in my own home. A guest who had not been told the rules of the evening. A guest who had arrived too late to understand what had already been decided. I folded my hands in my lap and let the quiet stretch, because I was beginning to understand something that neither of them had said out loud yet. They were waiting for me to ask the right question, or maybe the wrong one. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized they already knew the answer. I let the silence sit there, stretching across the table like something alive, something neither of them wanted to touch first, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for them. Almost, because I could see it now, the careful way they were choosing their words, the way they were trying to guide me somewhere, without saying anything directly, as if I would simply arrive at the conclusion on my own and make things easier for them. I picked up my glass and took a slow sip of wine, letting the pause grow just a little longer before I spoke. Is there something you want to tell me? I asked, my voice calm, steady, the kind of voice I had used for years when Daniel was a boy and trying to hide something behind his back. He looked up at me then, really looked this time, and for a brief second I saw the same hesitation, the same flicker of uncertainty that used to cross his face when he had broken a lamp or missed a curfew. But it disappeared quickly, replaced by something more practiced, more distant. No, he said, too quickly. Nothing like that. We just thought you should stay on top of things, that is all. Emily set her fork down with a soft, deliberate sound and folded her hands neatly in front of her. It is just that sometimes paperwork can be confusing, she added, her tone smooth, almost gentle. Especially with larger assets. Larger assets. The phrase landed with a quiet weight. I nodded slowly, as if I agreed, as if I did not already feel the shape of something forming beneath their words. I have managed this house for over 30 years, I said. There is not much about it that confuses me. Emily's smile did not falter, but something behind it tightened. Daniel shifted in his seat, glancing at her before looking back at me. That glance was not accidental. It was a signal. I had seen it before, in different forms, over the past few years, moments where he deferred to her without realizing it, where his decisions seemed to pass through her first before reaching me. Of course, he said, clearing his throat again. We are just trying to help. Help. I repeated the words silently in my mind, turning it over, examining it from every angle. Help was what I had given them when they could not afford their first apartment, when I had co-signed the loan without hesitation. Help was what I had offered when Emily wanted to start her small business and needed extra funds to get it off the ground. Help was what I had provided every time they needed something, and I told myself that family did not keep score. I placed my napkin gently beside my plate and leaned back slightly, studying them both now. Really studying them. The way you do when you realize the picture you have been looking at for years might not be what you thought it was. That call I received this morning. I said quietly. The one asking when I would be moving out. Daniel's hand froze halfway to his glass. Emily's expression flickered, just for a fraction of a second, before smoothing out again. There it was. Not denial. Not confusion. Recognition. I felt something settle inside me then, something cold and clear. Do either of you know anything about that? I asked, my eyes moving from one to the other. The silence that followed was not empty this time. It was full of everything they had not said, everything they had planned, everything they thought I did not understand. Daniel exhaled slowly, setting his glass down with care, as if sudden movements might make things worse. Emily did not look at me anymore. She looked at him. And in that moment, I did not need an answer. Because the truth was already sitting at the table with us, as real as the food, as heavy as the air, waiting for someone brave enough to say it out loud. Daniel was the first to look away. That told me everything I needed to know. Not his words, not whatever explanation he was about to offer, but that single, quiet movement, the way his eyes dropped to the table as if the truth had weight, and he could not carry it while looking at me. Emily, on the other hand, did not move at all. She sat perfectly still, her posture straight, her expression composed, as if she had already rehearsed this moment and knew exactly how to survive it. Mom, Daniel began, his voice softer now, careful, like he was stepping onto thin ice. It is not what you think. I felt a small, almost invisible smile touch the corner of my lips. I had heard that sentence before. Not from him, not exactly, but from people who believe that if they could control the narrative, they could control the outcome. Then tell me what it is, I said, folding my hands neatly in front of me. Because from where I am sitting, it looks very clear. He hesitated, just for a second, and then glanced at Emily again. There it was. That silent permission. That need for alignment before speaking. Emily gave the smallest nod, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. I was looking for it now. I was seeing everything now. We were trying to help you, Daniel said finally. The same word again. Help. It almost made me laugh. The house is too much for you, he continued. The maintenance, the taxes, the repairs. You should not have to deal with all of that at your age. At your age? 70. As if that number had quietly stripped me of my ability to think, to decide, to own what had been mine for decades. I nodded slowly, encouraging him to continue, because I wanted to hear how far he would go. So you sold it, I said, finishing the sentence for him when he could not. The words landed softly, but they did not break. They settled between us, solid and undeniable. Daniel swallowed. Emily finally spoke. We made a decision that benefits everyone, she said, her tone even, almost professional. The market is strong right now. We secured a very good price, and we have already arranged a place for you. A very nice community. Quiet. Safe. People your own age. I let her. Words hang there, examining them the way you examine something unfamiliar, something that looks harmless until you understand what it really is. A place for you. Not your home. Not your choice. A place. You arranged it, I repeated. Without telling me. Daniel leaned forward slightly, his voice tightening. We were going to tell you tonight, he said. We did not want to ruin your birthday. My birthday. I looked around the room, at the table I had set, at the food I had prepared, at the home that no longer belonged to me, and I felt something shift deep inside, something quiet and irreversible. You thought this would not ruin it? I asked, my voice still calm, still controlled, because I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. Emily reached for her glass, taking a slow sip before meeting my eyes again. We thought you would understand, she said. This is the practical choice. Practical. Another word that sounded reasonable until you realized what it was being used to justify. I leaned back in my chair, my hands resting lightly in my lap, and for a moment I said nothing. Because anger would have been easy. Tears would have been expected. But neither of those things would give me what I needed now. Instead, I simply looked at them, really looked this time, at the son I had raised and the woman he had chosen, and I realized that the people sitting across from me were not asking for my understanding. They were informing me of a decision they believed I had no power to change. And that, more than anything else, was their mistake. I reached for my glass, but did not drink. Instead, I let my fingers rest against the cool surface, grounding myself in something real, something that still belonged to me. The room felt smaller now, as if the walls had quietly moved in while we were talking, as if the space itself was adjusting to a truth I had not yet fully spoken out loud. "And the papers?" I asked calmly. "How exactly did you manage that?" Daniel shifted again, his discomfort growing more visible now that the hardest part had been said. "You signed some documents a while back," he replied, his voice careful, measured. "Remember? When we refinanced things to help with Emily's business expansion." I did remember. I remembered sitting at this very table, reading through pages of numbers and terms, trusting that my son would not place anything in front of me that was not in my best interest. I remembered how quickly it had all moved, how Daniel had assured me everything was routine, just a formality. I remembered how Emily had sat beside him, pointing to where I needed to sign, her voice warm, encouraging, patient. I had not questioned it. I had not needed to. Family does not trick you. That was what I had believed. Those documents were not for refinancing, I said quietly. It was not a question. It was a realization that had been forming since the moment that man had called me this morning. Emily leaned forward slightly, her hands resting neatly on the table. "They were part of a broader financial strategy," she said. "We structured things in a way that made the sale more efficient." Efficient. The word slid into the conversation like it belonged there, like it explained everything. I nodded slowly, absorbing it, placing it next to all the other words they had used tonight. Help. Practical. Efficient. Each one carefully chosen. Each one designed to make what they had done sound reasonable. Necessary. I looked down at my hands, at the faint lines and spots that had appeared over the years, at the evidence of a life lived building something that could now be taken with a signature I did not fully understand at the time. "So you used my trust," I said, lifting my eyes back to them, "as part of your strategy." Daniel flinched at that, just slightly. Emily did not. "We used the opportunity to make a decision that benefits the family," she corrected. There it was again. Not denial. Not apology. Just a different version of the same truth. I let out a slow breath, feeling something inside me settle into place, something steady and unshakable. "And where exactly am I supposed to go?" I asked. Daniel straightened, as if this was the part he felt more comfortable with, the part he had prepared for. "We found a beautiful place about 20 miles from here," he said. "It has great amenities, medical support, community activities. You will not have to worry about anything." 20 miles. I pictured the distance in my mind. Far enough to separate. Close enough to visit, occasionally, when it was convenient. A place where I would fit into a category, where I would no longer be the center of anything. Just another resident. Just another responsibility handled. "You have already arranged everything," I said. "Yes," Emily answered smoothly. "It is all taken care of." I nodded once more, letting the silence return, but this time it felt different. Not heavy, not uncertain, clear. Because in that moment, I understood something that neither of them had considered. They believed the decision was final. They believed the house was gone. They believed I had no move left to make. I lifted my glass then and took a small sip of wine, finally tasting it, finally feeling something real again. Then I set it down carefully and looked at them with a calm they did not recognize yet. Because the truth was, they had only seen the version of me that trusted them. They had never seen the version of me that knew exactly how to take that trust back. I did not raise my voice. I did not argue. I simply reached for the serving spoon and placed a small portion of mashed potatoes onto my plate, as if this were still just dinner, as if nothing had shifted beneath my feet. That was the moment they relaxed. I saw it happen. The slight drop in Daniel's shoulders. The way Emily leaned back in her chair, her posture loosening just enough to reveal what she truly believed. They thought it was over. They thought I had accepted it. That I would sit there, finish my meal, and quietly step into whatever life they had arranged for me. I picked up my fork again, taking a small bite, chewing slowly, giving them exactly what they expected. Silence. Compliance. Time passed in small, measured moments. The clink of silverware. The soft hum of the refrigerator in the next room. The distant sound of a car passing outside. Ordinary sounds in a house that was no longer mine, at least not on paper. "You will like it there," Emily said after a while, her tone light, almost reassuring. "They have walking paths, group dinners, even art classes." I nodded slightly, as if I were considering it, as if I needed her to describe my future to me. "It sounds organized," I said. That seemed to please her. Daniel glanced at me, searching for something in my expression, Maybe relief, maybe gratitude, maybe any sign that would make this easier for him. I gave him nothing. Not yet. Because I was thinking about something else. Something much older than this house. Much older than Emily. Something Daniel had forgotten. I set my fork down again, this time with intention, and reached for my napkin, dabbing my lips carefully before placing it beside my plate. Small movements. Controlled. Deliberate. You know, I said quietly, your father always believed in planning ahead. The room shifted again, but this time it was subtle, almost invisible. Daniel's eyes flickered at the mention of his father. Emily remained still, but I saw the brief pause, the calculation behind her calm expression. He used to say that trust was important. I continued, my voice even, reflective. But he also used to say that trust should never replace preparation. Daniel frowned slightly, confusion beginning to surface. What do you mean? He asked. I did not answer right away. Instead, I reached for my glass once more, taking another small sip, letting the silence stretch just enough to make them lean in, just enough to shift the balance of the room without raising my voice. I mean, I said finally, setting the glass down with care, that your father handled things differently than you might remember. Emily's eyes narrowed just slightly, not enough for anyone who did not know her to notice, but enough for me. She was listening now, really listening. Before he passed, I continued, he made sure everything we built together was protected. Not just for me, but from situations exactly like this. Daniel sat up straighter, his earlier confidence slipping, replaced by something less certain. Mom, I do not think that is necessary, he said quickly. Everything has already been finalized. Finalized. Another word. Another assumption. I met his eyes and held them this time, steady and unblinking. That depends, I said softly, on what you think you finalized. The silence that followed was different from the others. It was no longer filled with what they knew. It was filled with what they did not. And for the first time that evening, I saw something shift in Emily's expression. Not control, not certainty, doubt, just a flicker, but enough. Enough for me to know that the conversation had changed, even if they had not realized how much. Yet, because they had planned everything carefully, they had moved quietly, they had believed they were ahead of me, but they had forgotten one very simple thing. This house was not just a property. It was a life, and I had been living in it far longer than they had been planning to take it from me. Daniel opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out at first, and that was the moment I knew the balance had shifted completely, not with noise or confrontation, but with something quieter, something far more unsettling for them, uncertainty. Emily recovered faster. Of course she did. She always had a way of stepping into control when things began to slip, but even she was more careful now, more measured. Margaret, she said, her voice softer than before, almost respectful, as if she had suddenly remembered who she was speaking to. If there is something you are concerned about, we can review everything together. Review everything together. I almost admired the phrasing. It suggested openness without offering anything real. It assumed authority while pretending to share it. I tilted my head slightly, studying her, letting a small pause settle between us before I answered. That is thoughtful, I said, but I already reviewed it. Daniel blinked, confusion flashing across his face. What do you mean? He asked. I did not rush. I let the moment breathe, let them sit in the space between what they thought they knew and what I was about to say. This afternoon, I continued calmly. After that phone call, I reached out to someone your father trusted. That got their attention. Not just the words, but the name I had not yet said. The history behind it. Daniel leaned forward slightly, his earlier confidence now replaced with something sharper, more alert. Who? He asked. I held his gaze for a second longer than necessary, then answered. Mr. Harrison. The name landed exactly where I expected it to. Daniel's expression changed immediately, recognition mixed with unease. Emily's composure held, but I saw it again, that flicker, that calculation adjusting in real time. They knew the name. Of course they did. Robert Harrison had been our attorney for over 20 years. He had handled everything. The house, the accounts, the business your father built from nothing but long hours and stubborn determination. He is retired, Daniel said quickly as if that somehow weakened what I had just said. Not entirely, I replied. He still answers the phone when I call. I reached for my glass again, not because I needed to drink, but because the movement gave me a moment to watch them. to see how they processed each piece as I placed it carefully in front of them. I sent him copies of everything I signed. I continued. Every page, every document. Emily's fingers tightened slightly around the stem of her glass. Small, controlled, but there. And, she asked, her tone still even, but no longer effortless. I set my glass down gently, the soft sound marking the shift in the room. And he told me something very interesting. I said. Daniel's jaw tightened. Mom, there is no need to make this more complicated than it already is, he said. Everything was done legally. Legally. That word again. I nodded slowly, acknowledging it, accepting it on the surface while holding something else underneath. Yes, I said. That is exactly what I asked him. I leaned forward slightly now, just enough to close the distance, just enough to make sure they could not look away. And he said that legality depends on something very specific, I continued. Clarity. Emily did not move this time. She watched me carefully, her eyes sharp, searching for the exact edge of what I was about to reveal. Clarity of intent, I said. Clarity of understanding. And most importantly, clarity of consent. The silence that followed was not the same as before. It was not filled with their assumptions anymore. It was filled with possibility. Dangerous possibility. Daniel exhaled slowly, his composure slipping further. You signed the documents, he said. That is consent. I held his gaze, steady, unwavering. Only if the person signing fully understands what they are agreeing to, I replied. And according to Mr. Harrison, I paused, just long enough to let the weight of his name settle again, just long enough to make them lean into what came next. That is where things become questionable. The word hung there between us, questionable, and I could see the exact moment it landed, not just in their ears, but in their calculations, shifting something behind their eyes, forcing them to reconsider what they thought was already finished. Emily was the first to speak, but her voice was different now, still controlled, still measured, but no longer effortless. That is a very serious claim, she said carefully. I am sure Mr. Harrison would not make assumptions without reviewing everything properly. I nodded slightly, almost in agreement. Oh, he reviewed everything, I said. Every signature, every clause, every date. Daniel leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping lightly against the table, a nervous habit he had never quite outgrown. Mom, you are overcomplicating this, he said, but there was less certainty in his voice now, less authority. You signed willingly. You were there. You agreed. I let that sit for a moment, then tilted my head just slightly. Was I fully informed? I asked quietly. Neither of them answered right away. That was answer enough. I continued, my voice steady, almost reflective. Mr. Harrison reminded me of something your father insisted on years ago, I said. He added a clause to the property structure, one I had almost forgotten about. That caught Emily off guard. I saw it clearly this time. Not just a flicker. A pause. A real one. What clause? She asked, her tone sharper now, curiosity slipping into concern. I folded my hands together on the table, letting the moment stretch just long enough to make it uncomfortable. A protection clause, I said. One that requires any transfer of ownership to be accompanied by a separate, verified acknowledgement of intent. Not just a signature. Not just paperwork. A recorded confirmation that the owner fully understands and agrees to the nature of the transaction. Daniel's tapping stopped. Completely. That is not, he began, but he did not finish. Because he did not know. Because he had never asked. Emily's eyes narrowed slightly, her mind working through the implications, testing each piece against what she thought she had secured. We followed all standard procedures, she said, but now it sounded less like a statement and more like a defense. I nodded again, acknowledging the effort. Standard is not always sufficient, I replied. Not when there are additional conditions attached. The room felt different now. The same walls. The same table. But the air had shifted. The weight had moved. Mr. Harrison asked me a very simple question. I continued. He asked if I remembered ever sitting down, face to face, and clearly stating that I wanted to sell my home. I let the question linger because it did not need an answer. We all knew it. I slowly shook my head. I do not, I said. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, the first visible sign that his control was slipping. Mom, this is just a technicality, he said, but even he did not sound convinced anymore. Emily did not speak. She was thinking now, really thinking, recalculating every step, every assumption, every document she had trusted. I leaned back in my chair, calm, composed, exactly as I had been all evening. Technicalities matter, I said softly, especially when they are the difference between ownership and misunderstanding. The silence that followed was no longer theirs. It was mine, and for the first time since they walked into this house, I could see it clearly in their faces. They were no longer certain of anything. No one reached for their food anymore. The plates sat untouched, the warmth of the meal fading into something cold and irrelevant, just like the version of this evening they had planned. Daniel looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time, not as his mother, not as someone predictable, but as someone he did not fully understand anymore. Emily did not move, but I could see it in her eyes now. The calculations no longer smooth, no longer certain. She was searching for an angle, a way to regain control, but there was nothing left for her to hold on to. Even if that clause exists, she said finally, her voice carefully steady, it does not automatically reverse the sale. I nodded slowly, almost approving of the attempt. No, I said, it does not. That seemed to give Daniel a small sense of relief. He leaned forward slightly, as if the ground beneath him had steadied. Then what are you saying? He asked. I let the silence stretch just long enough to remind them who controlled it now. I am saying, I replied calmly, that the sale is not complete. Daniel frowned. That is not possible. The buyer signed. The funds were transferred. Conditionally, I said, correcting him gently, pending final verification of compliance with all contractual provisions. I watched as the meaning settled in, slowly, heavily. Emily's composure cracked just slightly, not in expression, but in stillness, the kind that comes when someone realizes they missed something important. Mr. Harrison has already filed a notice of dispute, I continued. This afternoon. Daniel's chair scraped lightly against the floor as he shifted, his control slipping further. You what? He asked. A formal notice, I repeated, which pauses the transaction until everything is reviewed. Emily's eyes sharpened, her mind moving quickly now, recalculating timelines, outcomes, risks. That will delay things, she said, trying to contain it, trying to keep it manageable. At most. I held her gaze, steady and unhurried. It will do more than delay, I said softly. Because if the clause was not properly satisfied, the agreement can be challenged. Daniel shook his head, disbelief mixing with something closer to fear now. Mom, why would you do that? He asked. I looked at him, really looked at him, at the boy I had raised and the man he had become, and for a moment there was no anger, no bitterness, just a quiet clarity. Because no one asked me, I said. The words were simple. They did not need anything else. Emily leaned forward slightly, her voice lower now, more direct. What do you want? She asked. Not an apology, not understanding, a negotiation. I almost smiled. I want time, I said. Time to decide what happens to my home. Not yours, not his, mine. The room fell silent again, but this time it was not heavy. It was clear, defined, final in a way they had not expected. I reached for my glass one last time and took a slow sip, letting the moment settle completely before I spoke again. And until that decision is made, I added quietly, nothing moves forward. Daniel looked down at the table, his hands still, his certainty gone. Emily sat back, her expression no longer composed, but controlled in a different way now, cautious, aware. I folded my hands in my lap and allowed myself a small, calm breath. Because for the first time that evening, the house felt like mine again. Not because of the walls, or the papers, or the signatures, but because I had reminded them of something they had forgotten. I was still here, and I was not finished.